The FPO will be recontesting an election in December 2016. If they win, they may well be the first right-wing populist party to take full control of government in a Western European country since the Second World War. But they didn't come out of nowhere. For over 50 years, the FPO has been contesting elections and has experienced numerous shifts in identity. Let's have a look at them. First, a brief word on the political system of Austria. It's not unlike many Western nations at heart, in that historically speaking, post-World War II, you have two middling parties that dominate the discourse. The OVP, or the Austrian People's Party, and the SPO, the Social Democratic Party. The OVP are Christian and conservative and consists of semi-autonomous federations belonging to the party, which have various, often contradictory interests. Basically, it's a big tent with huge ideological variability. The SPO was the Socialist Party. Pre-World War II it was explicitly Marxist, but now this has been toned down somewhat. The party is basically bog standard and socialist. It originated for those of the urban centres, most notably of course that being Vienna. This is important as the two-party system was originally implemented to ensure everyone had a place. The Catholics had the countryside and they could align with the OVP, whereas the urbanites, the socialists, could turn to the SPO. Often elections resulted in coalition governments between the two, so it was hardly really a democracy, to be honest. Power always remained with the same people. So then, we have a two-party system of red and black, socialists and Catholics. But what of those that did not fit in? In 1949, the Federation of Independence was founded. Now, this is interesting. Two liberal journalists, both of whom had been imprisoned during Nazi occupation, were the founders. The idea was to create a space for political vagabonds. These included a loose coalition, libertarians, national socialists, nationalists, capitalists, liberals, etc. Basically, it was a liberal party. Austria was undergoing an intense denazification process at the time. The worry of these chaps was that this could reignite National Socialist sentiment. The Federation of Independence was, at heart, a safety valve for those left by the wayside post-World War II. Another interesting point perhaps is that its formation was funded in part by the Socialist Party. This wasn't from the kindness of their heart or anything, this was a cynical attempt to split the right-wing vote. By 1955, the party had morphed into the Freedom Party of Austria, or the FPO as we now know it today. And up until 1980, it was led by two former SS leaders sequentially. Ironically though, it was these guys that spearheaded a move towards liberalisation. The FPO lacked nationalist rhetoric really, and instead it focused on issues of free market capitalism, personal liberty, small government, think Stefan Molyneux, kinda. This created a split in the party. The old nationalist vanguard splintered, resulting in the formation of the now defunct National Democratic Party, a country that incidentally was banned in 1980 under Austria's constitution. Anti-Nazi law. The FPO experienced minimal electoral success. Realistically, there's only so much sway asinine liberalism and free market capitalism can have on a jaded and disinterested population. But regardless, this trend continued between 1980 to 1986 under the Vice-Chancellor Norbert Hofer, who successfully aligned the party with the SPO Socialist Party. It is interesting to note how the most demonized party in the Austrian media right now has in the past been aligned so strongly with the socialists. There were even talks on merging the two parties together. Now, naturally, many of the nationalist elements within the FPO felt something needed a changing, and change certainly came. It really does astound me that so few of the English-speaking, right-leaning world have no idea who this man is. I had no idea either. His impact on Austrian politics was all-encompassing. His charisma and fortitude in forging political victory cannot be understated here. A young, attractive, sharp and determined upstart, Jörg Haider was a wild card. Impossible to contain and frankly a political genius. No man was more hated by the Austrian media. He won an election victory against Steger and took control of the party in 1986. The FPO surged in popularity. Let's put this into perspective. Steger in 1983 earned the FPO less than 5% of votes in the general election. In contrast, Haider, with an aggressively populist right-leaning message, acquired 22% just 10 years later, surpassing the OVP and becoming the second strongest political force in the country. Haider was a ferocious opponent of the establishment, to such an extent that his platform of anti-EU, small government, anti-immigration sentiment successfully influenced government policy. In 1991, a law was passed ensuring foreign workers would constitute no more than 10% of the country's workforce. This was reduced to 9% in 1993. This was in no small part due to Haider's popularity. Another point of interest here is his support from the educated classes and the young. Over 60% of his followers were under the age of 44, dissuaded by accusations of Nazism.
We had been attacked as xenophobic and fascist movements. I think there is no reason in behind. It's only the question of having a strong battle in Austria between a bloc of two powerful parties which do not want to lose this power. And we had been too successful in the past, and therefore they use all arguments they can put on the table to attack us.
The FPO's success can largely be explained by the fall of the Iron Curtain in the 1990s. Paranoia about masses of migrants travelling from Eastern Europe became extensive. Moreover, an economic boom in the 1980s put pressure on the labour force, and employers sought other means of obtaining labour. Yugoslavs formed a vast percentage of this influx, and many Austrians felt shunned aside in relation to the new arrivals. The FPO were quick to capitalise upon the public's anxiety. Come 1999, the FPO achieved huge electoral success and entered into a coalitional government with the OVP. This was huge and sent surges of anxiety throughout the Eurozone. Diplomatic sanctions were put in place, for how on earth could the EU embrace a government with elements of the so-called far right? Of course, these sanctions amounted to incredibly little. A few handshakes were withheld, a few meetings boycotted. Ultimately, they were lifted in 2000, but this does raise some odd questions. Haider hitherto had been tentatively supportive of the EU. That said, anti-EU sentiment exploded onto the Austrian political scene as a result of the sanctions, a sentiment that is still widely held today. Despite the hand-wringing desperation of the EU, the FPO was able to accomplish little in government. Haider himself distanced himself from the political process and kept himself behind the scenes. Indeed, EU sanctions proved symbolic for things to come. The EU didn't react to the actions of an extremist Austrian government, but rather to the principle of anything significantly right-leaning achieving power. All this talk of the EU curtailing democracy, of being totalitarian, of belittling national sovereignty, it's a wonder that the case of the FPO in 1999 doesn't occur more in political discourse as a leading example. Indeed, too few today are aware outside of Austria. To be blunt though, the FPO and government were a failure. Pressured by the OVP's staunch neoliberalism, the party found itself in conflict with those in government and those of the grassroots. Haider aligned himself with the latter and in 2005 formed a new party, the Alliance for the Future of Austria, or the BZO. Haider failed to mobilise his new party effectively and tragically died in 2008. Really, few in recent European history have had such a monumental influence politically. There are parallels in a way to Trump here, a maverick, an egotist, and nevertheless a genius, able to smash the two-party system single-handedly, but ultimately falling just short of the mark. His influence continues despite disparate voices within the FPO disavowing him. We all need scapegoats, and sadly, the failure of the FPO government largely falls on Haider. It's a convenient means of deflecting criticism, if, albeit, an unfortunate one. Heinz Christian Strache took over the party from Haider in 2005, along with close ally and now presidential candidate Norbert Hofer. Hofer, current presidential candidate for the FPO, is an eccentric man. Walking with the aid of a stick due to a paragliding accident, the man uses his quirks to his advantage. Always seen with a gun, a staunch supporter of the right to bear arms, Hofer has continued pursuing a message of Austria first. The party continued to hammer home a message of EU skepticism, anti-Islam and anti-immigration, successfully remobilising their core base of supporters. So Austria right now is once again ruled by the same two-party system. However, the election that's coming is a guaranteed landmark. The two main parties, the OVP and the SPO, have already been eliminated. The race is now between Norbert Hofer of the FPO and the Green candidate Alexander van der Bellen. In May, the election was held, with van der Bellen winning 0.6% more of the votes than Hofer, incredibly close, and as a result, this was appealed by Hofer, and a re-vote will now be taking place on December the 4th amid accusations of voter fraud. So what can we expect from the election? What does the FPO stand for? Despite popular media sentiment to the contrary, the party can hardly be dubbed far-right. Rather, the FPO stands for regulated capitalism coupled with a welfare state. A strong Austria first policy holds sway with antipathy towards large amounts of immigration and the threat of Islamization. The social policy of the party is basically liberal in nature, as you would expect from its heritage. Austria, a country with same-sex traffic lights, isn't exactly a country receptive to a message associated more strongly with the Christian right of America. Although, interestingly enough, alliances with the Tea Party have been subtly alluded to in the past. Respect for individual freedom is guaranteed. Personal liberty is a strong component of the party's libertarian rhetoric. As for the EU, the party seeks reform as opposed to a point-blank exit. That said, were Turkey to become a member state, Hofer has stated categorically a referendum would be held. Judging by the EU's response to the FPO in the past, it would hardly be surprising for Turkish membership to be granted were the FPO victorious, but who knows? Regardless, the rise of the FPO and its increasing involvement in Austrian politics from 1990 onwards is a fascinating case study in the rise of rightist parties across Europe. The story of a party's obscurity, its changing identities, its popularity surges, possibly culminating in presidency. Well, time will tell.